Hey guys, today we are going to be comparing these two scooters, a Yamaha C3 and a Honda Ruckus. As you guys know, I really enjoy the Yamaha C3 and I wanted to do a video comparing the C3 to the Ruckus. And here you have both my bikes. The C3 has the headlights much lower down the bike than the Ruckus. I do like the Ruckus's headlights a little bit better, and the Ruckus has got something that the C3 doesn't have, which is a front rack. The C3 looks very retro with its headlight down low, looks almost like a Cushman, but I do like the headlight. It's a retro style that's very different than the Ruckus, but also makes it a little bit harder to see in traffic. The Ruckus looks very much like an industrial bike, which is the appeal of the bike to start out in the first place. The headlights look great. I really enjoy the dual headlights, almost like a speed triple. The Ruckus has something that the C3 doesn't have, which is this little luggage rack right here. So you can put something here and bungee it over. The blinkers on the C3 are a little bit more rounder, and they're a little bit more modern looking than the Honda Ruckus ones. The blinkers on the Ruckus are these kind of flimsy, square ones. But I guess it goes with the appeal of the styling of the Ruckus. The C3 has a drum front brake. The Ruckus has a drum front brake as well. The braking power of these two bikes is similar. One of the benefits of the Honda Ruckus is having this flat floorboard. On the C3 you don't have the flat floorboard, which makes it hard to carry things if you wanted to carry like your grocery bags on the C3. I actually like the styling of the C3's hump in the middle, but it makes it less useful. The Ruckus's lack of plastic makes it very easy to do any sort of maintenance. But on the C3, it's easy enough to do the same maintenance. Oil changes are extremely easy on both bikes. And that's pretty much all you're going to be doing. From the rear, you can see that the C3 looks just a little bit bigger than the Ruckus, which isn't a downside. They're almost the same exact size. They even use the same tires and everything. But the C3 is just a tad bit longer, which makes it a little bit more stable at speed. I do like the styling of the C3 a little bit better in the rear. It looks a little bit more modern, but of course it takes a little bit of time to kind of get used to the C3's weird looks. You can see that the Honda Ruckus strikes a little bit of a thinner profile than the C3. The C3, in contrast, has a very larger butt than the Ruckus. The controls on the Ruckus are a little bit of a letdown. Everything's kind of cheap steel or aluminum, and there's nothing special about the controls. Even the turn signals are hard to use because and oftentimes when you make a turn and you want to get it in the middle, you overstep and go to the right in the turn signals. It's a very simple mechanism, but it's kind of a lame, like I'm kind of surprised that Honda didn't put a little bit more fit and finish into this Ruckus. You also have additional controls down here. Down here you have your high beam light and your fuel light. This doesn't even give you like a fuel gauge per se. It's just a light that comes on when you hit reserve. Kind of like a really bad design. I wish they would include it into the main speedo. It's a very basic system here with the speedo in miles per hour and kilometers, and then you have an odometer. And you do have a light for your coolant or your engine temperature. And then down here you have your turn signal dummy light. It's kind of a disappointing styling. I mean, I do think that's what they wanted to make it simple, but they could have had better gauges and like better controls. And then you have your key here, and it's a very easy starting bike. On the right side of the handlebar of the Ruckus, you have your kill switch and your start button, and of course your throttle. On the left you have your headlights, you have your turn signals, and your horn. Nothing special. Everything is just so simple on this bike, which is probably the draw for a lot of people. And it is nice that they give you a handlebar with a cross brace here. So that is kind of beckoning the off-roading handlebars. But this bike is not really an off-road bike at all. The suspension on it is just terrible for riding off-road, which is typical of any 50cc scooter. Your taillight is very typical. It is almost retro styling cheapness. On the Yamaha C3, you can tell that it's got a little bit more going on. Even the buttons feel like they're a little bit higher quality. Everything is a little bit nicer than the Ruckus's cheapness of controls. So even the buttons are much better and higher quality. The indicators are much easier to use because you can cancel the signal just by pushing in, and when you hit left, for example, it goes to the middle. Unlike the Ruckuses, which goes to the left and stays there, then you have to pry it into the middle. A system I don't really think is effective. And of course you have your horn here. The buttons are very high quality, and you have your kill switch and you have your start button, your throttle over there. Very simple, but much better quality. Even the handlebar looks better than the Ruckus. On your speedometer, they give you a fuel gauge, which is excellent. Like, I'm surprised that they didn't include that in the Ruckus. And everything is clustered here on your speedo. So you have your speedo, you have your odometer, you have your fuel gauge, you have your headlight, you have your temperature gauge or your engine light, and then you have your temperature gauge on the right side. Your signal is on this cluster. Much better design than the Ruckus. I can understand why they went simple on the Ruckus, but there are speedos that are clustered into this that are much better looking directly from the factory, that they could have put all the other things on here and just made it look a little bit nicer. I had a Honda Elite for quite some time, and that bike was a much better bike, and the fit and finish on that was so much better than this. Also on the C3, it's worth pointing out that in addition to the ignition being a little bit sturdier, they give you an anti-theft cluster here where you can use your key to put a plate over the ignition, which really helps out in the city because a lot of people who drive these are going to be city slickers. So it's good to have something that's not going to get stolen. Compared to the Ruckus, the C3's ass is much bigger. You can see it's much wider. But that is kind of like one of the appeals of it. Both of these bikes have drum rear brakes as well. You really don't need much to stop these bikes while riding because they're pretty slow bikes. People do soup up the Ruckus quite a bit. Physically, the C3 is just a little bit longer than the Honda Ruckus, just by a couple of inches. But a lot of it has to do with the underseat storage. The C3 also feels like it's a little bit bigger in the handlebars, but the handlebars are located in the same position that the Ruckus is. And when I'm looking at it, the Ruckus actually sits a little bit higher than the C3, which gives it a little bit of an off-road feel rather than a road-style C3 that's very short and low to the ground. Or a kickstart on these bikes, because oftentimes the battery goes bad on these, so you can just kickstart it. Both of these bikes have kickstarters. I know it might seem that I'm bashing the Ruckus, but I'm comparing it relatively to the C3, and the C3 you can find much cheaper than the Ruckus. So I find that you're paying a premium for the Ruckus and not getting a whole lot for your money. You're getting less for your money than the C3. Let's say that you get the C3. You can remove the plastics if you wanted and still be able to have a bike that you can modify. Now I do realize that the Ruckus off the market is extremely good, but I just don't see it. I don't see the appeal. But maybe the Ruckus is not the bike for me. When I first bought my first Ruckus, I thought I'd really enjoy it, and I got on it and I was like, man, this bike is slower than any other bike I've ridden. It feels almost dangerously slow compared to the C3. Both these bikes, it's worth noting that they're both fuel injected and very easy to start bikes. Alright guys, I hope you make the right decision when it comes to buying a scooter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.